Hello and welcome to Zero Trust World 2025. Cyber Risk TV is here, recording live from the Caribe Royale in Orlando, Florida. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me for our next interview is Eoin McGrath, Solutions Engineer at ThreatLocker EMEA. Welcome, Eoin. How are you?
Nice to meet you, Adrian. I'm doing really well. Delighted to be in Florida. The weather is so much nicer here.
Yeah, it's even East Tennessee. I looked at our cameras at our house, and it snowed.
Oh, wow.
Right after we left. So it's we've got snow on the ground there. So big change for us too.
I'd say so.
Yeah. All right. So solutions engineer. Tell me a little bit about what that role is like at ThreatLocker.
Well, we take our partners from the initial demonstration of the product right the way through to a successful implementation of our zero trust endpoint solution. So, if you become a partner with ThreatLocker, you'll have me or a member of my team. They're going to be with you all the way through the process. So, it's actually a really, really great job. You see the ins and outs of lots of diverse companies. You get to meet loads of really cool people. So, definitely a really great job. I'd recommend it to anybody.
Yeah, and so what we want to talk about today is securing access to cloud services and data in the cloud as well. Yeah.
So that's a massively broad question. The cloud is huge, it's enormous. Mm-hmm. And as your viewers might be able to tell by my accent, I'm from the EU. So immediately when we start thinking about our cloud data, we have to think about data sovereignty. It's a really important question for people in the US to make sure that their data stays in the US. Likewise, for people in the EU or the Middle East, if we're in Switzerland, our data can't leave Switzerland. Yeah. If we're in the EU, can't leave the EU. Likewise, in
Germany's a big
Saudi
stickler.
Arabia.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. All of these places, you have to consider that data sovereignty before you even start thinking about the practicalities of, are my access policies configured correctly? Is all of the appropriate authentication in place? Are my object services exposed? So it's a really big area to concentrate on. But if you take it in small chunks, if you understand the fundamentals of what those cloud services are doing and the fundamentals of what your vendors are offering, you're going to be able to make steps to make sure that your data remains secure and that no unauthorized access can happen to your cloud services and to your cloud data.
So what are some of the tools or processes that you go through to figure some of that out? Because I imagine a lot of organizations think they understand how their data flows through the environments and how things work, but then if you go and look at it, you're like, no, actually.
So again, to understand the nature of how that data is being stored, some cloud data is basically a glorified SMB. It's just something that, you connect to using, 25-year-old protocols. Other things are, fairly complex object stores that form part of a chain of a web application. Number one, you need to understand that. If you're using a simple cloud file share, you need to audit the access the same way you'd audit access to that share in a Windows environment to make sure that there isn't any, overly broad permissions out there. Ensure MFA is enabled. Very basic things can help you make sure that that's allowed. Then when it comes to your object stores, this is where things start to get really complex and things start to get really fun because, the sheer complexity of managing those objects, can be mind-blowing. People, and again, like what happens in Active Directory, people say, oh, we'll just have a global allow there, and that object then is suddenly accessible to all of the other processes that are out there in your cloud store. So you really need to make sure that you audit all of that access really accurately. Most of the CSPs are going to have, pretty good services to let you go and audit what's happening there. And when you're defining the access for those objects, do it at the start. Don't leave it as an afterthought to, we should apply some security here. I think a problem that a misconception that a lot of people have about the cloud is that it's fundamentally secure. Mm-hmm. They think, right. Oh yes, we're purchasing a service from Google or from Microsoft or from Oracle. They're going to look after all of that for us. Mm-hmm. But if you set your passwords to be password 123, you're in just as much trouble as you would have been if it was done on an SMB share. So really, if we roll back to fundamentals, I think that's the key to making sure all of those cloud items are going to be secured. Then another area that people tend to kind of overlook when it comes to cloud data is a nature of an awful lot of the cloud services that you're going to be using is, it's just in time. The CSPs are going to deallocate storage, based off requirements or parameters that you might set. You need to be fully aware of what happens when that data gets deallocated. Where is that deallocated data going? Coming back to our cloud sovereignty, coming back to our data sovereignty things, most of the is the warehouse storage in the US or is it in the EU? That needs to be taken into mind. And when something gets deleted, is it a hard delete? Is it a soft delete and things like that? So we need to be aware of situations like that.
Yeah. We just talked about. I forget the name of the organization that discovered this. But it was shown to be quite active in a lot of ransomware campaigns where they were using the bring your own key feature in AWS to encrypt the company's S3 contents. Yes. And then, it's a very much a classic ransomware case where,
of course,
we've encrypted your stuff and now...
And you think, it's on S3, it must be secure. Do you have an immutable backup of that data? Right. Are you able to restore?
And is that backup also in S3?
Of course. And have you, have you done your due diligence with those backups? Have you made sure that in a disaster recovery scenario that you're able to recover that data and put it into the appropriate place? Hopefully it won't happen to any of, the big providers, but should a CSP become sanctioned or something like that, how easy is it to get that data out of that service? There's a lot of almost political considerations that need to be taken with your cloud data as well.
Yeah, I saw a case not too long ago, somebody posting about it, and I forget which cloud provider it was, but somebody couldn't get their website data out. Like their account had been shut down for some reason. They tried to appeal it, and the appeal was denied, and that was it. Maybe the Wayback Machine, they can scrape
perhaps,
some of their...
and we hear all of these horror stories of of streamers and things like that where their account gets compromised or blocked for no reason. It's your livelihood with that data that's there in those services. So you need to be really, really aware of who has access to it, what potential laws might be applied to all of those things as well. So it's not something to be taken lightly. Oh, there's a special offer on some cloud storage, let's go with that cheapest option. You might be better off to stick with the valid and more well-known actors in that space as well.
And just to clarify on something you said earlier, you were differentiating between, like Windows-style file shares, things that employees would be using, and what you called object storage. So is that kind of like you're talking about like application assets, like you might store in Akamai or Fastly or
correct?
Or
So
AWS?
these are items. They're essentially it's your data, but it's abstracted out to an object that your application, and if you publish it, your partner's applications might connect to over an API. We need to make sure that those APIs are secured. We need to make sure that all of that access that gets into the system is there. If you had a poorly written write API into some of your cloud data, that's opening you to a denial of service attack, and it's potentially opening you to massive costs as well from the data being uploaded to the cloud services as well. So there's so many things that we need to make sure we're securing.
And another new attack I saw the other day, again from researchers, was like a S3 bucket, like subdomain takeover style thing, where when you use an S3 bucket and you name it, AWS gives you like a CNAME.
Yes.
So be like mystuff.aws.whatever.s3.aws. Yes. And a lot of people still had web assets pointing to buckets that no longer existed. Mm-hmm. And as long as that bucket doesn't exist, anybody can register that name
and
then replace that PDF with .exe malware.
Yeah, and then back to the point of when data is deleted or data is deallocated, you need to understand what the procedures are for those particular services. You know, Microsoft and Google and indeed Amazon, they provide really good documentation.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm allowed
Only
to...
if you read it.
Indeed.
It
I don't
only
know.
works if you read it.
As with all these things, but once you become aware of an attack like you mentioned, if somebody is able to, you know, recycle those locations that you
Yeah.
have out there, suddenly you've become a hoster of malware, which is, you know, really dangerous reputationally, and, you know, it's not something you want your company to be associated with.
Yeah, and it's kind of an abstraction that we never had to worry about in the past. You know, but now that everything is very distributed and we're using things like the cloud, we're not only worried about our data, but the pointers that we created to
Indeed,
that to that data.
And to come back to a more kind of mundane example that I would deal with day to day in my solutions engineering work, if we're dealing with a classic client-server application that relies on the cloud to push updates out, if the company goes out of business, you know, if a domain name gets hijacked, you know,
Yeah.
what was once softwarecompany.com now will try to download some malware. That's a potential risk that people are exposing themselves to by using, you know, software that relies on the cloud. So you can check out some pretty cool threat locker technologies that will help you with that. So
Yeah.
ring fencing will stop scenarios like that from occurring. So again, the cloud is a massively nebulous thing. Is it just the cloud? Is it client-server applications communicating with the cloud? Is it your end users, you know, uploading or downloading data from there? We need to be able to map out what all of those links are, what the potential risks are, and, you know, kind of have that audit, have that overview, and have that knowledge of where our data is, what it's doing, and what people can do with it or without it.
Yeah, and I wonder, like, how do you deal with this problem on both sides? You know, like in this review that these researchers did, you know, they found stuff where looking at it, you would think surely nobody's still running that old version of that software. You know,
But-
and once they set up that S3 bucket and they claimed the name, hundreds of thousands of still
people.
getting.
Of course, but
Yeah.
of course. And likewise, you know, as we all know, moving everything to the cloud isn't that cure-all that, you know,
Yeah.
that old, you know, moving that old server to the cloud or moving that old data share to the cloud. The problem still remains. If there's PII in that data that you've moved to the cloud, you better hope that, you know, your security standards are accurate for that. You know, if there is a location where there is a, you know, a known hole or a known breach or something like that, you better hope that moving these things to the cloud aren't going to resolve those particular issues either. So really, I think that my takeaway is, while the cloud storage and services are absolutely awesome, they still have the same inherent risks that we have in a client-server environment, and probably more risks just due to the very
They
fact
enable us to do
that
it at
they're-
scale, at
that they're
larger
actually in the cloud and they can do it at scale, and it's out there looking at the wide world of the internet. And we all know every other day there's a new CVE or a new potential exploit out there that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so just securing. So, you know, I think one of the challenges here is, you know, how do you architect your employees' use of these services, right? You know, and it seems like one of the takeaways I took from that is, okay, maybe we shouldn't point people at the S3 bucket name. Maybe we should have our own
It needs to
custom
be, yeah, absolutely,
DNS name.
absolutely.
So it's kind of like
privileged.
thinking about the life
Yeah.
cycle of an application.
Yeah, we want to abstract these things. You want to make sure that it is absolutely as privileged. You know, you don't want your employees to be able to write directly to your S3 bucket. So let's abstract that out via an API where, you know, that data can be cleansed, examined, and, you know, put into your bucket, rather than, you know, opening the fire hose and letting all of that data just, you know, directly rush into the environment. So again, we need to be clever and we need to think about just what we're doing. You know, it isn't as straightforward as copying something to a file server. It is going out over the internet, so you need to make sure that all of the appropriate encryption protocols are used, that your data at rest and in transit is being encrypted. Now, most of these things we can rely on the internet to do, but for legacy applications or custom applications that might be in play, there's going to be additional steps involved in scenarios like that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Eoin, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a very interesting conversation.
It was really nice to talk to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
To access all the Cyber Risk TV content from Zero Trust World 2025, visit securityweekly.com/ZTW and stick around. We'll be back in a bit with some more interviews. Thank you so much.
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you.